Hello everyone, question and answer video today from a private email message that I simply read. So, hello sir, I've been watching your channel for around 2 months at this point, and the end of your last video, I don't know which one it is, I presume it was the one either about medieval Polish warfare or the times and meaning of Taliakos. I should recheck the time, but I remember what I said and I will explain this. Raised a question I've had for a while. If someone isn't extremely experienced in history, where is a good place to start? As you said, there's obviously a level of understanding which can only be achieved by academics, which as a high schooler I'm obviously not. But is there any sort of primer or even some higher level academic sources which would aid understanding medieval history, which would help contextualize your videos, or is it just a pointless endeavor without spending literal decades of researching? Because, parenthesis, this is what I actually said in the video. And regardless of your response, I'd also like to thank you for the content. Okay, well, thanks to you. Really, since you're one of the few serious lecture channels on YouTube which doesn't focus on humor or oversimplifying points for the low-minded. Oh, okay, that's a great compliment. Thank you, sincerely, Signature. Now, as you know, because this is not the first time we actually cover a similar question, I've already discussed this topic widely. Like, how do you start? And is it to even learn things in a sort of sophisticated way? Here, we see there's no question like the guy wanting to become a historian necessarily. It's as if, he was asking me whether there is another way. And actually, I'm incredibly sensitive to that specific question because, and that's why I want to take this question and answer video a bit further. Not just compared to the question, but actually like looking at aspects that we never fully discussed. Because from one side, there is a face of Schwerpunkt that is the one you can see in the way of expression, on the comments that I select, and more. That, of course, is the one that stresses mostly, like, this channel is great because it talks about essentially university-level historical analysis, and I often come up with such statements like, abandon any hope to understand history thoroughly if you haven't studied for decades history. And sometimes I also add, of course, having a formal historical education is really crucial in many ways, empirically, thus also substantially. That's the thing that matters the most. Naturally, in other videos I already challenged the same view, at least especially about the latter aspect. Because at times I found myself having to explain, for example, why is the content that I make made the way it is, which is difficult, especially when you are actually habituated, as I am, to do proper historical research and to cite every single thing and spending months just to write an article. And so what is that I'm actually doing here? And on the other, there is this sense that even though the, say, non-formal, academic path is definitely much more difficult to take if you have any specific interest in history, that you should really abandon any hope if you really don't have that, right? But it's always balanced. There is always an exception that is not much driven by, in fact, simple game of chances. This should be really based on actual seriousness and motivation. Like, whatever brought you to study history at a point must have been of some relevance that you can also understand as a non-professional, being really that crucial in many aspects of life. And why is it that in the first place we're making these videos for? I like this question because it doesn't even, again, address the fact of, what does this guy want to do with history. And I respect that because it is a broader issue. In this video, I would like also to propagandize a bit, my own work, meaning that I thought about this and I said, well, yeah, there are some things that I'm habituated to answer normally to this question, so they mostly start from a theoretical point of view, the boring one, like how you should do this and that. And I made, again, already plenty of videos on the topic, how to select books and how to even approach a university path and all this stuff. But the question is also, is Schwerpunkt really, a valid aid for this? Like, can Schwerpunkt help, and how? What is that you can't from others? And if so, what is that makes it actually valuable and so expandable if really considered in such a unique way? And in order to answer this question, I need to point out, first of all, in fact, what this channel is about. I've had, as you know, in the last year or so, the doubling of my subscribers, which means that in many ways I have a greater reach. I noticed that certain videos are getting higher along the way without much effort now, so that there are at least some topics that tend to produce that effect, and today we'll not talk much about this per se. But it's important to address also that the type, you see, this guy said that it's just 2 months and a half that he's been following. And that's interesting because at that time I wasn't getting many subscribers, telling the truth. And I still often don't know, like, from at least the voice of the very followers, were, say, how did your Schwerpunkt journey began? Because and why especially you're motivated to watch my content. Because, for example, this is not on the objective merit of the channel, but I wouldn't watch my own content because, in part, I am the same person making it, which may sound obviously strange to say, but we'll explain now better why. Of course, from my side of the story, that's also something I can't spend for your curiosity, because you must know what is this all the way it is. I tend to understand, it's a very common experience among YouTubers, that and especially when there is, well, this is valid for all content, right? But given the enormous amount of information that I've put out here, that's even more evident, because I sort of made all of that. I made all the videos, I researched the content, I built this on top of very, again, specific professional kernel. So it's difficult to watch Schwerpunkt in many ways. If anything, it's difficult to understand what it is, because it definitely, especially YouTube, has habituated us to a sort of standard type of historical consumption, which at times is not even that bad, all in all. Like, it's not that specific videos just taken from a strictly historical point of view are bad. The point is also, however, what kind of effect they're supposed to make on the audience. And that's something that over the years I've taken ever more into consideration, because you may have, again, a pretty flat and relatively unresearched script, but if things are more or less alright in the historical fundamentals, like you could say, like, what's bad about that? Well, as you know, I don't get many views, so the first thing that is frustrating, or at least I don't care much, because otherwise at this point I would have already hanged myself if I had really been frustrated about this, is, of course, but it if anything makes me curious in that sense, in this audience sense, is how, for example, very, very short videos, I'm not talking, I don't know, even 15 or 20 minutes, but like, I don't know, 5-8 minutes long videos about pretty big topics can get easily, and even with I don't know, AI, completely say inaccurate imagery, and or sometimes I make myself all these problems like, oh my god, my content is willingly not as graphically updated and entertaining, whatever. Then I actually watched very few videos I could from the bigger channels. I look at the graphics and say, well, you know what, it's just a bunch of pictures with slight animation. What is there actually so special with this? And so from one side, I realized that aside from my personal way of making content, say my persona, how I speak English, that is, I don't know, difficult to understand sometimes, especially to a native tongue, must be terrifying, pretty annoying. But there must be something else. There must be a prejudice. Sometimes it can be even very positive, because after all, I do have views. I do have mostly a silent audience that I think is the one that pulls the cart, that makes the channel what it is, and that does not need to pat me on the shoulder, because nobody needs this, let's be honest. It just is interested in my content, and that's it. The impression I get, however, regarding the aforementioned normal misunderstanding, misinterpretation of practically anything, not just on YouTube or on the internet, but pretty much like, you know, you give a book to read to, I don't know, 20 people, and they will all tell you different things about that. It's terrible, terrifying. Of course, also the level of that it's perhaps really the worst thing to assess on average. The point, though, is that there are interesting dynamics in the way the channel gets popularized. There are some specific topics for which YouTube, I think, gets more revenues from the ads, and that is pushed more, and so I tend to get a type of audience that takes my channel for something that is not. This revolves mostly around just some sort of ethno-tribalistic, individualistic, relativistic exaltation. This is none of what the channel is actually about, and I will not say what it is about because it's not the video. I know I'm taking it from the distance, but you know, we're approaching now to the core issue. But more than else, I think they're so habituated to the rest of YouTube that they do not understand that this type of work is genuinely, say, well-crafted in a historical sense. And that can be extremely useful to anyone that wants to watch this call. And this is important for this question and answer video, because the person is asking, but what is that I can't really start with? And I don't want to banally answer, well, there is a Schwerpunkt after all, because it is true that as a YouTube channel, we do not straightforwardly go towards the fundamentals. Actually, we do, but there is so much content out there that, especially if you have not been prepared to chew properly the idea that all these videos are tied together, and that, of course, there is a broader point that is very difficult to absorb, right? This is not something that you can immediately present to even someone starting a university history path, like in the first day of lesson, right? That's not what we do. In fact, it seems like when I also make the take lessons for the first graders, right, university speaking, you must spend an enormous amount of time to teach them things that they should have actually learned in school. So it's also interesting that here the author of the question is a high schooler, which I presume in this case is, you know, like the guy has, if not just finished high school, like it's not, I don't know, a man in his 50s. And so it's important because young people, of course, have a lot of potential, and the way you inform them, the imprinting you give them, at that point in their career is really crucial to see the world. There are lots of other things going on, a lot of conflictuality of iconoclasm. That's normal for young people, tend to be that more radical. But there are still some essentials that are the ones essentially that should stick with you, and they do really, if you absorb them at that point throughout the whole path. That is not about much right or left, it's just, the way you should morally and scientifically work and produce, which is the true historian's craft, right? Which is sadly not what sometimes on YouTube you do find even this marketing titles and presenting people. This is the thing that, if anything, triggers me the most. I don't go after other channels, but in general, like, if you are making people buy this notion, at least present them with something that is actually, what a historian would do, and what he can or can't do that others really, really want. I realize that most people do not watch my videos so much because they're long. There's a guy just today who commented on me, "Oh yeah, this is such an interesting video. There's an interesting content." I think it was like the one about 12th century Florence that other people liked as well. It says, "But I'm not going to watch it because it's so long, and I'm going to read it, elsewhere." Except it's a bit difficult for you to actually find the material, not just the material on which I based that video on, but especially my personal criticism as a PhD in medieval history. And that sort of spent an important amount of time, not much researching for that video or for studying, back in the day, the history of Florence, etc., but the entire surrounding, meaning you see how this is the product of YouTube's sort of historical irrelevance, I would say, at this point. That people are so habituated to the kind of, but this is simple history that I can understand, I can access, right? So, why I'm going to watch 2 hours long lessons of something, because, I can use Wikipedia and find the same content. You will not find it content like that. And you will actually not even find it if you bought the books that I used and throughout my entire career to arrive to the other day making that video about 12th century Florence. You understand why I'm talking about this while answering to this question, because it seems to me that is the single most underrated aspect of my channel. As you know, I'm not here, and I always said it, for entertaining you. I'm not here for showing you the pictures, and some are cool actually. I care very much about that. I don't hope to be entertaining if not in a conventionally, maybe, intellectually curious way. I would like to transmit to you the sap of what I fundamentally spotted. What I gained, like as a broader wisdom from my historical studies. Then there are the people who are iconoclastic and relativistic and say, "But who are you? We don't even know who you are." There are people that are maybe not even surprised of the fact that I'm a PhD in medieval history, but that either don't sort of know exactly what it's supposed to mean in practice. That's in part what I made, for example, that series about my doctoral path, like how it's made, like from the simplest aspects, like preparing a project, selection, researching. How does that happen? Because it seems to me that most people, like, I don't want to say this guy, because that's not the point of his question to begin with, do not take into consideration, because either at some point they know they don't want to take that path specifically, and or they maybe feel challenged by that. I have people that want to undermine, not just, it's not about my credibility, but it's like saying, this paternalizing attitude of, I don't know, there was a comment here from the other day that told me, for example, how to use primary sources. That was not even specific. Like, it's not like I had made a mistake using any kind of source, but the sense was that as a documentary, my I don't know whichever topic it was also very highly, again, critical analysis from topics that I studied personally for years, should have integrated literally how like documentaries sometimes do to add this aura of pseudo historical accuracy, like the explicit citation from a primary source. And you see, even just for that comment, I should make a 2 hours long lesson to explain what kind of content is fit for that, which other one isn't. And if you can't recognize that, what is that you can't historically recognize in that precise instance? I see that all the time. I remember back in the day, I was, well, not just, you get it from many different situations, like the expert talking and the average person completely misunderstanding whatever he or she said. And sometimes experts are terrible. That's also true. I mean, self-proclaimed experts. I never come on this channel. I've told you what I do, and it is important, believe me. This is not a self-promotional matter to say that I am a PhD, for example, because I criticize my colleagues all the time. I've never come here and saying, whatever a PhD says, you should follow that. So I think I'm pretty fair about the whole thing. Never have said, I am a PhD, so except for the topic in which I actually specialize in a very narrow time and space sense, like, I am just the best person, nobody else can say anything else. But sometimes I have a tyrannical streak for my character, my personality. I do tend towards that direction, but I would never say something like that. I would prefer simply just to ignore statements like those, because I think I prove with my work what I'm saying, and even if a person does not understand, it's okay. I don't even have any problem about that. For example, I often, in this kind of videos, discuss, for example, comments that I do not publish, but I tell you what they tell me. Why don't I publish them? Because if another person in that condition reads them, there are many problems about this kind of gnosiological issue. It's simply going to add to that, right? It's not going to make it any better. And if anything, I take the time in series like these to explain better in detail this issue. So is Schwerpunkt actually a good starting point from this? As I was saying before, especially if you're new to the channel, you've never checked the playlist. The playlists are really crucial, because I think when you see, especially in certain topics, how many different videos are made, that's already by itself a great intro to what a general, say, brainstorming of what a historical overview through the playlist itself, not just through the individual videos content can be, right? But yes, there is actually a big capacity, big power, let's say, a big potential in my videos for introducing anyone to whichever topic I discuss. Mostly, again, it's medieval history from my side, but I studied ancient warfare a lot, right? Again, I'm a polymologist, so it's mostly also regarding Middle Ages warfare. I think this is pretty evident from the whole channel. So if you want really to start with that, I can tell you that the things I say take a lot of time to understand from the books, because I come from a path that initially ignored the very things that I teach, meaning that I wasn't born in a home where my parents were history professors, right? They did completely different things. Nor I I loved history since childhood, admittedly. So I was had an influence also from my parents, indeed, and even backwards, genealogically speaking. But I've done all by myself. Like, I've made all the mistakes by myself. I refined the work all by myself, and yet, I realized that this thing I did by myself, that I'm putting on Schwerpunkt, is something I have never found, not just among my colleagues, but the more I read, the more I study, the more I research, I realize it hasn't really been done quite the same way by other scholars. And there is a very specific reason, because I'm just in the beginnings of academic career proper, meaning post-university one. Meaning, yes, the PhD is considerable as that at the beginning. Now I'm in the sort of publish as much as you can so that you can acquire academic points for, say, the professorial career. But many people in my situation just want to publish as much as they can, to make points, to enter somewhere, to have a salary. I fortunately already get a salary from my general living, and Schwerpunkt even minimally contributes to this. And therefore I have very different motivations from the average. Like, being a professor is not, especially in history, is not particularly remunerative. Admittedly, turns out, at least in the United States, real stat that there are more millionaires among school teachers even than lawyers, right? So that's always an interesting memento. However, what I'm doing here is not just out of, this guy wants views, wants notoriety, those are useful, all right? As you see, I have not put literally myself out here. I have a lot of stuff recorded, but I almost never talk about myself or my background or whatever. I generally really only talk about history. And so out there are people who are noticing me, and some of them are interested in my so-called ideology. And in that vicious cycle, it would be fine to inquire what kind of ideology a person has, but there is a specific cultural milieu in which not just the term ideology is considered just with a negative semantics, even though the etymology is really neutral, and it's also pretty much a universal thing to have an ideology, to think, if anything, keeping ideas together. But the criticism, when there is, because most people agree that my content is solid, historically wise, aside from all the sort of technical limits of the format, the video format, etc., my language and so on, they tend to really tilt towards the sense of this guy must be on YouTube because he has a progressed ideology that brought him to bend history in a certain way. Aside from the fact that by now I am on YouTube for several years, and you can even see a relative evolution of my thinking along the way that would in part even contradict this. It's not like I've changed much of my core beliefs. Admittedly, that's true, but I actually developed those in parallel with history. So what you see on this channel, regardless of the, say, sometimes there is definitely a bias, there is definitely, and that's also not, there should not be a negative word, because everyone has one, and I've never personally used this as an excuse to say, so okay, since everybody has a different idea, I will just enforce an idea on whatever I can find in order to people to agree with me. If anything, my tyranny began to escalate ever since I saw that what I historically found out actually aligned with certain things, and I didn't even start that on purpose, right? And you, again, can see that most of my content is actually purely military history, right? Yesterday's video, or last video, I don't know when I'm going to publish this, but it's about late Achaemenid army development, medieval Polish warfare, the Battle of Taliakotso. Well, this other topic from Constantine IX to Alexius I is not really military to talk about the political consequence, also military history of the Byzantine Empire, Byzantine war horse. I mean, even if I had any specific bias, the question is, why would I make so many videos about this topic and then eventually come up with a bias? That's something nobody has ever discussed, right? And as you can see from the videos, like, I take my time and my energies to document what I'm saying, right? If, for example, people are dissatisfied with my views about World War I, first of all, I'm not surprised, because I'm here exactly to target all the most popular misconceptions about that. Nobody that I've found has ever proposed like a counter to this, even when they didn't like it. I could make, like I did last week, that 2 hours long video about the Inferno of Verdun, explaining the entire Ermattungsstrategie von Falkenhayn's plans. That video was more watched than the others, which was for a couple of weeks ago actually. We're still at 900 views or something. I have these stats here in front of my eyes while I'm recording. That is a type of military historical analysis that I do not normally find online. If I find something about the Battle of Verdun, let's make even an example. Normally, I make a simple search. Aside from the documentaries, imagine there is even a professor that discusses this, because these institutions are incredibly self-referential as well. We are the great expert, the great analysts of war, because this is the institute that talks about this. Sometimes you listen to these things, it's seems like a high schooler's work to the level of actual insight and research. Okay, let's search Battle Verdun. Document or lesson. Well, first of all, you see, okay, there's a World War I documentary about the Great War. That is, this is a good channel making, of course, content like this. But I suspect in 26 minutes. And I see that there is a lot of course, it's important to look at the mapping, etc. But I see, I don't know, newspapers and quotes from the final rank soldier. I haven't watched the video, but all I know, if this is an all-round on Verdun and not specifically talking about, say, the German strategy, even if you spent half of the video, 13 minutes, discussing that, you see, how does this return to you? Like, how much will you actually know about Verdun? I'm sure that these videos are good to attract people's attention, etc. But how much will you actually and substantially know about Verdun a week later? You have watched that video. This is the point that I often make. Here I see actually an extraordinarily scarce amount. Let's say Battle of Verdun, lesson or class. I see 13 minutes, 9 minutes. There is one for 47 that is, however, just more like a documentary, that one just telling like a story, not really explaining anything. Another one with this all have either millions or hundreds of thousands of views. As a historian, I can say that even though maybe there were of course historians or reliable historical sourcing, criticism in those videos, these videos cannot provide you, even if you watch them all, with the level of insight that is that is necessary plus to understand the very core of what especially from a military point of view, also from a political one and general course of the war, the Battle of Verdun actually was. Right? I personally teach and research the art of war, which is a very different thing from military history, per se, because it basically has, as I say it all the time, this diachronic and comparative approach of the transformation of armies, and of course them fighting against one another throughout history. Not even most scholars have this. Even when they are, oh my god, this guy wrote a book about the war, the Great War. Yeah, they may, but they may actually not have studied in great depth, for example, the strategic side of the story. You can talk a lot about the propaganda of the war, you can talk about war economy, you can talk about certain other, there are many cuts you can tell the story from, but if you are interested, this is what I do personally, and so that's the case, into the whole military side of the story, I do it this way, and yet I don't see it being done by anybody. This is not to say that I'm an expert on the Battle of Verdun. This is not to say that I'm the better person who talked about the Battle of Verdun. I'm sure there are lots of way more, I'm sure, because I don't doubt it, I'm certain actually of the fact that there are many people who know the Battle of Verdun, also from a strictly strategic viewpoint, much better than I do. In many ways they don't speak on YouTube. Probably nobody reads their books or articles. Actually, military history, especially in the Anglosphere, is falling after having been actually important, like especially after World War II, compared to our, for example, continental academia. Like now it's sort of fading, or it's approaching things from different standpoints of the whole thing of diversity or whatever. So would watching my video about the Battle of Verdun, which definitely did catch attention compared to the others, help a person to seriously understand what lay behind the battle? First of all, than most other channels? Well, definitely. Then a book? Well, probably not. However, that's the point. Should you read a book instead of listening to my videos? Remember, the videos I make are never standalone. Right? I can begin, of course, at a point and realize that I have to be a bit more broadly introductory. Sometimes I also repeat myself across the videos and or reference to the others regarding things, in fact, I've already said, to make you aware of the fact that my content is designed this way. So probably reading a book on that specific topic would be better. Reading 10 books, it would be even better. But if you're interested in the art of war and you are looking at insight on World War I, I think that the videos have an advantage that books don't have. One of the few ones that, if properly made, if addressing the actual point, because that's why the channel is called Schwerpunkt, in case you haven't noticed that, and I still have to make a video about that, explaining what the Schwerpunkt is properly, because that's yet another thing people get wrong all the time. That's why I'm here. So that if you watch this stuff, you can basically follow my diachronic and comparative competence, whichever it is, that you will not likely find elsewhere. Because while, for example, even, I don't know, a specialist on World War I may have studied, which is rare at this point in history, but there are, maybe several battles of the war in some sound strategic and tactical sense from a vast amount of sources. Will not digress now on the problems that contemporary historians have, because of course the sources on the Great War are immense and difficult to manage. So there are lots of other methodological issues. I often also discuss this kind of things. How often would you? Like, I'm very critical as well, so my own work, and I provide you, together with the explanation, also with a criticism of the same, which is also pretty rare. Like, most channels are straightforwardly telling you, this is basically it, right? Or this is our version of it. And I hope you're entertained. Hope to see you again. I'm doing a completely different thing. I want to be, first of all, objective. Like, that's beyond the channel, beyond it. That's how I'm made. Like, I want to find the correct explanation. It is true that sometimes it's impossible to find even just a very well-centered and based answer to the topic, so that you have to take it from, say, one viewpoint or another. As I said before, that's what I do to multiple videos. This applies to the art of war as a whole. There are people who may be that knowledgeable, say, about World War I, if that's all they have studied. But since they haven't studied the Peloponnesian War, or the 30 Years' War, or the 100 Years' War, they will not actually understand World War I to the degree that I personally think really matters. Because if you don't have that level of diachronic and comparative awareness, it's very easy to make comparisons and to see things in a perspective that actually flattens the whole thing, because it's flat in itself, because it does not contain pregressed knowledge. For example, how much, but this is a very banal example that I rarely ever do, but how often do you hear a specialist of World War I that maybe also has, of course, a knowledge about the past warfare, but that has never sort of gone too much in depth in it, as far as the understanding of how shockingly different World War I really was by the time it was fought. For example, the Butcher's myth did definitely originate in a broader, say, beyond historical background of, say, populistic approach to his. It's a very, it starts with mass society, was in part fueling, paradoxically, the same, at least the same reasons were fueling that myth were the ones that were fueling part of the enthusiasm of the same people to go to war, for which they are largely actually decisively responsible to begin with. But if you, for example, start from the notion that these men just sent, these generals sent all these men to die, asking yourself the question of what they were doing and your insight on how armies worked at that point and had been working from in the previous generations is unknown to you. Like, how can you really and correctly evaluate the work of these generals? It will seem to you that these were the hyper-competent people that somehow screwed up, because you've never posed yourself the problem of, that something has never been done before, and something so hard, like war in general, and also harder in that larger scale that World War I really was, presented some difficulties and unknowns that had been previously unfaced by humanity at that level of command. And so everything can come to influence dramatically such. This is not to say that I'm not, of course, short-viewed on many topics. I learned a lot along the way myself, but that's because I do cover so much different military history, and every time I make a point, I'm making it, just like the example I already provided you, with a specific, say, provocation of sort. Like, have you ever thought about that? Or why do you think that? Or why is this view so popular, etc.? I'm personally very interested, besides my sort of quest for objectivity, in assessing why is it that we have come to believe certain particular things, because that seems actually much more useful in order to eventually start to have a conversation, a serious one, around the same topic. Because it does definitely seem as if, and this is important for someone asking, for example, a question like today's, that also the academic space is not sort of enough to provide the correct answer, right? It mostly seems due to hyper-specialization, hyper-compartmentalization that, and it is really true, the scholars do not agree with one another, do not actually speak with one another in spite of the all the interdisciplinary approach and this kind of thing. They are always failing, because even assuming that there would be a lack of that, or at least understanding why there is, the fact that there isn't, at least there isn't in such an important scale, is in itself not the product of, okay, so let's force people who have nothing to do with one another to talk, because evidently they have nothing to say to one another. If they had done that, if they had that, definitely they would have done it. And so the problem is another one, that there was a much greater level of interdisciplinary approach, paradoxically in the elderly times, more than there is today, where you would think that that would be so important because we criticize, the old scholars for that, right? So we must be the better ones. We aren't at all, right? It has nothing to do with how much history we can access today, written by someone else. It has to do with the intelligence with which you criticize and you analyze history. And this is the real problem. Most people today do not want to do that because it's a lot of hard work. And so, like the guy who said, okay, I will spit essentially on the inside of a PhD in medieval history that is spending, 2 hours to tell me the story of 12th century Florence, that I doubt this person or most of the people that watch my content have even the idea where to begin to find anything about, rather than making, it's not about the topic, it's about accepting that there is someone who has a way of telling you the thing that is not the usual sort of cheaply mashed script to titillate the less, how the guy here in the letter says, for the low-minded, right? So the question, I think, is crucial because even from it you can sense that yes, people do want to know history, do not care very much about humors or oversimplified content, right? At least if they are serious about history, they will automatically discard, okay, this is simple history. Why should you watch simple history? I mean, some of it may be entertaining. I'm sure personally that there are lots of people who watch those videos actually because they find it slightly cringy and so they want to tell their own thing, except the comment section turns out to be also the collection of cringes, statements that can, and oversimplifications and myths and whatever can be done. Unfortunately, social media offered that opportunity to, which is yet another big problem, like people pretending to actually have a competence that they don't have, yes, but being actually as maliciously aware of the fact that they don't. And so finding a content or platform like that to express their opinion, being actually a counter-cultural and ultimately failing, because the ultimate consequence is just diluting everything to nothingness, towards actually serious history that you can find somewhere else. But also requires way more work to do. So far from saying, and I explain this often, that Schwerpunkt is that kind of highest level, because it cannot be the case for any YouTube content, even if it's run by a PhD, made by a PhD. The point is that it's still as very advanced. It depends on the type of video, but more or less the focus is the same, the level of depth is the same. Even if I condense topics, it's just also important for some sort of synthesis capacity and so on. that you can't quite find on YouTube. And I'm extremely honest about this, because there is, for example, a pretty interesting group of actually few, surely scholars, who make videos that are somehow, in fact, more similar to mine, that, however, also seem to be a bit boxed into that, okay, I will choose a style, a persona, I will not make any specific reference, but now it's not people LARPing or anything reenacting. I'm talking about purely intellectually engaged figures in research, etc. That, however, will in that case have a serious bias in the, for example, in the narrow choice of topics, and or even in the ones that you could find. So the guy maybe knows more about that. Yeah, not more than much. At least the point is always the same. I will not make any names, but there was, for example, a series on Ukrainian history that I made that was pretty insightful, and I think it's like the ABC of Ukrainian history. For anyone to study it, you can find it on manuals. You can find it also sort of more advancedly critical material. And I made it a couple of years ago, and then recently there was a guy who probably did not, I don't know whether he studied the same text that I did. It's not important, right? There is a pretty straightforwardly clear understanding of Ukrainian history, regardless what people like to make you believe. And this guy made an interesting video on, it was actually a criticism of Tucker's Putin's interview. Like, that was the point. And basically this YouTuber took the time to debunk the whole thing with the obvious knowledge of any person that has actually studied Ukrainian history, but doing it by starting to say things like, you see, it takes me to tell these things, because most of you will actually not know that it's basic Ukrainian history. Like, I understand it's actually more advanced. It should be, in this sense, I'm sure he's either a PhD or something pretty similar. But you see, the difference between me and this person is that I was making that series just to cover Ukrainian history as I cover the history of many other countries, and also having a bias, and also, say, not stopping to smell the roses, but say appreciating also what's good, what's positive about a certain historical picture, what we can gain for that, and never telling you, oh my god, this is such ultra-advanced history. And my impression is that that guy, for example, passes for some sort of hyper-sophisticated intellectual, also because most of his narratives are fitting a particular national pool. Just by the way, was not about Ukraine or not Ukraine. This is about essentially just the perspective, the narrating style that appeals more to an audience of, say, I can mix the cards here, more of the British audience than an American one, say, as an example, and profiting mostly just for that, and the fact that, of course, there is some informed knowledge there. There is some criticism towards other people, for example, criticized that interview that also did not know Ukrainian history in that sense, and the guy was extremely right in denouncing, also in that how superficial and ignorant and literally flat and incapable most public figures in that case, out of, I think it were essentially political figures, were about. And we do need that kind of content. But you see, the way sometimes it passes, not because this guy presented himself in a way or another, but because, for example, I make this sort of more archaically primitive videos, and I presume that people don't even want to watch them, because they seem like, oh my god, this is like, I don't know, a third grader making a video. What technically wise, what should be the historical insight? The historical insight is good, right? I'm not telling you, oh my god, it's excellent, it's whatever, but it's good from, I tell you, again, as a doctor in history. It's not good in the sense that it's like, okay, any other content on YouTube that is, say, before I use the adjective good in a conventionally average disclosuring way, which is an incredibly different thing from saying, okay, this is actually a solid, good historical analysis. That's a completely different thing, right? And yet another reason why I think this content is good for beginners is that it habituates them to, from one side, sort of the basic information, depending, of course, on which content it is. For example, here in the question, I was struck by this aspect. It says, what is there sort of primer or even some higher level academic source which would aid understanding medieval history, which would help contextualize your videos? So the interesting thing about this is it seems, at least from this circumvolution, that the ultimate point, like in order to understand my content, seems to be, and I noticed this among my audience, that at times the level of historical, especially of topic choice, because I think that's what impresses some of you the most, is beyond what people's genuine historical awareness is, right? I find ever more frequent comments about things like, I could even find them, like, how specific is this? For example, that video about, happens to be the same, the one about 12th century Florence. Okay, oh my god, this is so extremely specific. Yeah, it is kind of extremely specific for what? For YouTube's average, I agree. I absolutely agree. But in a broader historical sense, is, I don't know, talking about Florence during the 12th century, something so ultra specific? I don't think so. I think the most ultra specific content in terms of why are we even talking about this is, I don't know, the Messian fleet, supply line of the 2nd century AD. And instead, that was, for example, a video that people would watch. Oh my god, we needed to know this because it's so cool. And some did come up saying, well, this is how you even come up with these topics. But the way the topics still resonate is different from others. And so, actually, I see this extremely, I can tell you, it's an extremely privileged perspective here to appreciate what is that people think about what they want to see about history. That's actually the thing that I think impresses me the most. How and why people think that a certain topic is more or less interesting or important than another. For example, I think that here the question, for example, is about medieval history in general. As a medievalist, I look at my work and made, at this point, I think, yes, more than 1,000 videos about the Middle Ages, and I still feel like, oh my god, I haven't even begun to cover the whole thing. There are so many huge gaps in between. Even though I did actually cover a bit of everything, but I'm aware, of course, of the fact that there is so much just like even beginning. For example, sometimes I title, also a bit ironically, my videos a very short introduction, and people actually believe sometimes that I'm serious. That, I mean, they think that, that I'm serious in the sense that I'm thinking that that's the very short one, but it's obviously a statement to say that this topic is so big that it does require such, 2 hours long introduction, because it's so important, and it's not an hyperbole, and people do take that as an hyperbole, and do not understand why, for example, we need, in fact, to have such a 2 hours long video. And they remain perplexed. I've met, like, I haven't really seen the faces of these users, but in their comments sometimes they were serious. They were saying, but it says very short introduction. It's like 2 hours long. Naturally, the older date followers know what I mean by this. But you see, making 2 plus 2 in terms of basic historical intelligence, what I critically and analytically mean, by such videos is not there. And so actually looking at my videos in the as a whole, so not just the one that I upload last, that you can be reminded of daily, but actually the wall, to which every new video is inextricably and ever more inextricably, the more I go on, obviously, linked, is the ultimate point, is the fact that if you really want to know more or less everything about medieval warfare, at least my channel would be the best one to watch. And if you don't get that, because the picture is so big that in perspective, admittedly, it doesn't even seem like that, well, it may be in part YouTube's fault as a general site. It's not like YouTube shows you, oh my god, look at how many, in a single page, how many videos this guy made. They don't care. They care for the videos that make, in interest of time, more views. And that's how you make more subscribers. And even when you do that, these subscribers, as I was saying in the beginning, think that you're just like the other, right? The umpteenth YouTube channel that has actually nothing to do with, in fact, that. So yes, you should watch Schwerpunkt if you want what especially? Well, especially that, as I was saying before, that basic information plus a type of criticism that gets straight into the sort of most specific and detailed, but also important and, in a sense, intelligent side of the story. Meaning, just to make an example, yesterday I made that video because I don't really want to sound, I don't think that modesty is a virtue. I don't. In fact, I wouldn't even speak in these terms if I simply were having a normal conversation. But again, you must impress people to a degree. You don't have to fake it, right? But I don't want to come up here and say, okay, I'm speaking from a pedestal, you must listen to what I say, otherwise you're an idiot. That's not, first of all, that's not true. Secondly, I could never do it. Even if maybe that would get me more views, even just through more haters. That's not the point. But there are certain points that are more sophisticated than others. For example, yesterday's video, late augmented army developments. I inserted you in the dates to understand what period we're talking about. And we discussed mostly, because as we were saying yesterday, all the auxiliaries of the Achaemenid Empire treated mostly in the historical military unit series, the Hellenic mercenaries that are basically like the forces de frappe, we could say, involved here, and then the Kardakis that are essentially this likely, like either emergential or slightly upgraded Iranian and or other Achaemenid subjects, mostly infantry, probably not even forces that may have been also a response to the increasing introduction of political warfare, even though, I mean, through the Hellenic mercenaries in the various satrapies of the empire, even though that's a particularly foggy topic, we can't really say for sure what these Kardakis were. But in that sense, we debunked a myth, for example, the one that some scholars erroneously spread, of the fact that these Kardakis were simply, I don't know, some Achaemenid hoplites, like a doctrinal and doctrinally as positively developed copy of the Hellenic mercenaries from the Persians to have some heavier infantry that could cope with them. Right? And in that sense, we explained, you see, when I say the intelligent thing, it's not just that we said it's wrong for this or that reason, but we also explained that, of course, the Achaemenid army did not need such a thing because their type of warfare was, in a way, much more advanced than even just having, you know, a heavier or lighter, say, wide amount of heavier troops to cope with the Hellenic hoplites that were hired, of course, by the same empire. And there are very specific reasons in The Art of War, suffragated by also iconographic archaeological evidence that tells us something, again, important, consistent about what not just the Achaemenid army, but also politics and society were about at the time. You see, what I said in the last couple of minutes is a type of statement that I honestly never found on YouTube. Many people may maybe overlook it, like saying maybe this is not the first thing that strikes me about what Schwerpunkt discussed today, but in a strictly military historical way, it's one of sort of it's actually a simple thought, or at least it may sound complex, but it really gets down to a fundamental point. But it is in this sense also sophisticated and intelligent, because it takes at least that minimal amount to, for example, toy with a couple of sources to even just understand certain philological mistakes. And those are sources, incidentally, that we read many times in Schwerpunkt for other battles. And from those videos, those relative videos, you can get, for example, how I judge these sources and why. Not that I judge, because you can judge, I don't know, Polybius or Xenophon, just, if you're the first person who has come about in the context. But I mean that you must judge having, of course, well studied their work, which also is an endeavor that you must at least start to master. Just also coming back to the question, yes, you must always study sources. You should also say scholarship is an auxilium more than else, right? It can be excellent, can be very good, but it should always seen as an auxilium. Nothing more. Like, it's not the scholarship that makes the let's say the truth, right? That's not exactly what it is. And what matters, in fact, is the research, the process, the method that comes closer to the truth and is able to show you why. And that requires work. And that's definitely not something that you find on the average YouTube video that tells you, oh, look, there were these soldiers, they looked like this, oh, they fought in this battle, they were ruled by it. You see, that's the kind of approach. Even if it's well done, even if the information is accurate, it still will skip the most crucial indicators, the most crucial thinking, the most crucial context approach, and actually objective and concrete reality. That's why these channels do not seek for that. First of all, it's extremely more difficult. If you also don't have much of a unitary vision, it's sort of difficult to master. For example, channels with millions of subscribers, there are very few, of course, but they tend to have a team behind that and to have actually very different writers. I was asked by a very famous one a couple of years ago to write for them, and I'm just not made for that. As I said, I'm not here to get paid. In a primary sense, it did happen at some point for some historical consultancy, but it's not the point. The point why I'm here, you want to consider that I made thousands of videos about the art of war. Like, even if, say, I were the most evil, biased, corrupt, shady, really lying or whatever individual, the fact that I made thousands of videos of YouTube confers me to some characteristics that basically not, say, other people also have, but that finding specifically what I do, of course, they do not exist elsewhere. They're not owned by anyone, which is yet another reason why you may want to start with Schwerpunkt. Because that part on the contextualization of my own videos, I think, is heartbreaking. Like, it's sort of moving. I mean it in a positive sense. I mean, this guy says, where can I start to know history to the point that I can contextualize your videos in a way and I get that it's in there as their wall. But of course, you should, because this is really the point of the question, you should really, of course, have some sort of parallel type of formal education of some sort. That would help a lot. It's not something that you must have, but as I explained in the relative videos, yes, because many people ask me this question, yes, you should have something like that. That would prevent you, if anything, from at least probably posing 95% of the aforementioned comments that I was discussing. Unfortunately, however, that's a very optimistic statement. I'm not an optimist nor a pessimist, but let's say, unfortunately, it's not the case. You may, as I was saying before, have a bachelor, a master, a doctorate, but that does not confer you automatically like this competence or capacity. I know people made PhDs that are just terrible. But they don't even understand. I mean, there are some countries in which basically, for example, the PhD, and this is actually what happens in most countries, which the PhD is just granted to you as by proposal of a professor that says, I don't know, you wrote a good master thesis, and so do you want to do a PhD? I will make you do it. What kind of mean is that? I had to participate to a public competition, public selection. I passed over 16 people in what was that year like the top humanistic faculty, top ranked humanistic faculty in the world, and I won it. And it was all anonymous. It was based on merit. We had to write a large essay. You know, there are differences. If anything, this is also another point about why Schwerpunkt should be itself this primary, is that I also do treat sort of manualistic history. Admittedly, I stopped doing it in the at least more conventional kind of sense of manualistic history a couple of years ago. I mean, literally the ABC of, okay, let's talk about like, I don't know, 1 hour long video about Norman England, right? That kind of conciseness. I have that kind of stuff, right? It is meant for beginners. I should actually resume part of that because I could today also make much better content in that way. I'm also more experienced exactly in answering specific questions for people that are really starting. However, what really Schwerpunkt is very fit for is having such wide range of topics in terms of times and spaces. Meaning that that's something I'm very, very proud of. If you want to know, say, the history of Germany, down to every province, or Italy, to every city, serious about the English monarchs, etc. You do have this on Schwerpunkt. I have playlists that really help a lot. Like if you want to, for example, learn history in chronological order. That's something I never thought it could be done, but let's say I created playlists based on the century. Because I mostly thought that people want to know about the century, specifically were Facebook groups in which I shared was of the 11th century on. And they would want to kill you if you posted something was from, I don't know, 1102. And but the sense is also that you could watch like those videos century by century and grasping there a lot about like the progression of European history in what is effectively a pretty intensive medieval history class like you cannot afford at university. Because at university, the first classes of medieval history, like from 476 to 1492, is just this incredibly generic. This depends on the professor usually, but also manualistically wise. I've read lots of Anglospheres medieval history manuals, and they're not good. Let's be honest. At least they are good for certain things, right? There is a much greater socioeconomical bias. There is a great sort of British-centric bias to an extent. That wouldn't even be the problem, but the structuralism, the fact that they're really diverting you from knowing, in fact, every single place in perspective and in chronological order is unacceptable, right? What I do, I think one of the things, and as I was saying before, I'm most proud of in absolute terms is not just that I cover literally everything with that degree of homogeneity, if anything, because I'm the one also making the videos in that way that, as you know, also gets way more in depth than just monolithic, of course. But especially the fact that I teach history, let's say, objectivizing the importance of polities, of military cultures, of countries, in an actually comparative, yes, and diachronic way, but meaning that that prevalent approach that exists in the masses nowadays towards the Middle Ages, that is, I will focus just on my country during the Middle Ages because I am fixated with a certain, especially tribalistic view of history, and so I will not even, study the much more important late or even high medieval history of my country, but just the early Middle Ages. Because and I will not even say why they do that, which is kind of obvious, is completely demolished by my content. And that's also why many people can't stand me, I think, even if they don't voice it very often, and they do not watch my content as a consequence, because I destroy the kind of fantasy that they build in their minds. Like, Schwerpunkt is designed to objectivize the absolute value of civilization. And if you don't understand that, it's over, right? And the best part of that, of course, is this is coupled, indeed, with traditional views, right? That is not the usual, again, so you're the one who prefers the early Middle Ages, and that, no, it's the other way around. It's the non-obvious path, and the actually correct one also by traditional doctrine, right? When you see power, you have to ask yourself how it worked. If you can't, it's because either you're envious of that or jealous of that, or it's too much work. And you do not want to accept that actually being you, that on average is not such a great experience, is actually not that important in historical perspective. And so, yes, your refuge into simpler realities that also we know chronically less, because they were objectively less important, is not the way to go. And the only way to learn medieval history or any other history is to know the actual law. And it demolishes greatly also, in fact, also the leftistic view, because, they told you that if you don't want to study just Northwestern, like medieval England, you must study, medieval India, right, or medieval Egypt. Well, you may want to study maybe medieval France, medieval Italy, medieval Germany, medieval Spain, maybe, right? And let's be honest, how many people actually do? Look on social media. Most people fixated with the Middle Ages just fixated with a specifically ethnic pool, or can be even just a country. And that's mostly where they do not move anything from. If anything, there are those sort of reenactment, cross-cultural things like, yes, let's invite a Mongol reenactor at our Viking history festival, something like that, because to show that we're not, racist, but it's also like the useful, exotic, thing that does not challenge us, and that maybe they totally ignore Carolingian or post-Carolingian history that is disproportionately more important from any other point of view, but never mind that, right? So that's what we're looking at from of course, an imperial perspective, and what was the actual value that the same Norsemen actually at the time did have, and that you can, in fact, find a pretty consistent explanation of on Schwerpunkt. And so it's the non-obvious. Schwerpunkt does not provide you the obvious. Actually, and I don't want to be modest on this. you will not find any of this kind. You will not find this narrative. You will not find this actually objectively researched historical accuracy and assessment elsewhere. For these topics, forget it. You must study. But in fact, coming back to your question, this is the point. Many people say, okay, so this is just a YouTube channel, so I will study books, or I will get a degree. As we were saying before, that's not enough, right? You will actually not succeed in getting that kind of a perspective. You don't do what I do. You would be surprised that I actually had girlfriends throughout this time that actually, yes, I do live like a monk most of the time, but I do travel. I do have, a broader. I actually project history on everything I do, including interpersonal relations. I will not shy away from my level of aggressiveness concerning how much I enforce this. But if seriously you haven't spent, as I said in that video that you cited, decades researching for a purpose, it's a bit difficult to make it. The purpose, of course, having a formal education does give you a purpose, because there is a career to progress in. And I personally did not follow this because I pursued the ultimate step of the ladder. I pursued this because it was sort of, given that I loved researching history, this was sort of a dopamine motivator that made me actually learn the thing over time. To me, it started becoming too boring. I learned too few even through this, and that's why I started Schwerpunkt. And I can say that, for example, my doctorate experience is, of course, it's different from Schwerpunkt, but let's say in terms of useful expandability and contributing to historical assessment, they're on the same scale. Like, of course, a doctorate taught me to make a fully serious scientific research and, say, knowing how to write even just 700 pages of thesis, for it also to make sense and to be very well welcomed, actually, by people who didn't believe I could even do something like that, especially if I explained what I actually wrote in that thesis, which is also normally the opposite sort of proceeding that most people bailed out from. But Schwerpunkt gave me this enormous range of historical awareness and moral approach to history. I can read essentially a person's mind just by knowing what kind of their historical interests are by this point, how they write. I can see, say, the age of a person through the kind of writing. I understand what they're going to, what kind of rhetoric they are essentially echoing. And I think it was a guy who wrote the other day, I think it was still a comment, says, yeah, basically, you're right, because this was yes, the video about Schwerpunkt's content or something like that, or how to interpret it, similar to this one. But of course, the insight changes, perfections over time. And the guy said, yes, you're right. Essentially, I'm not here to hear about how 6th, 7th century Arab armies worked. I'm here to essentially get mostly your traditional wisdom, let's say, focal point, because that's the term that he used, because you express it in a better way than I do. It sort of fills the gaps of it, like sort of gives it a more formal test, etc., also in a doctrinal sense. And so, yes, I can also skip the rest. But that's also a mistake, because in that video I was pointing out how this is yet another issue. It's completely separated from the question, but there is a great rise in archetypal, I would say, obsession, psychosis. Archetypes are very powerful and even dangerous, because if you don't have, like, for example, in my case, a pretty solid sort of historical backbone, you can't quite resist to that specific ideas, and you will start at that point bending history to your ideas. For example, recently I made some videos about the Welsh and the Ghibellines. That's a topic, for example, that I discovered for some people it's unknown and or known just through the mystical fascists or whatever, just because that's the only source I've ever heard them talking about it from, with the same nervousness. And these people do not start from actual history. They read the stuff from somewhere, then they Google, I don't know, the images, the names, the characters of the time, and they start saying, okay, putting people in a box. So here, Ghibelline, right, Apollonian, good, Guelph, no, it's chthonic, bad, evil, all this stuff. And they go on, like saying, okay, I studied enough of this after, I don't know, 2 weeks, and they pass to the next step, and they build up this castle of cards that is ridiculous to the extent that, of course, also in the traditional sense, all in archetypally speaking, all this is intertwined. You cannot say the reason why you study history is exactly to discerning part of also that value. The fact that, for example, academia has forgotten about those values or wanted to reject them to begin with has nothing to do with the fact that you, by reading those texts, will actually acquire a specific competence in the subject matter and pretend to, rewrite the history of those years on the basis of what we very advancedly know, and that you probably never even pose yourself the problem of actually reading or studying well. It's not to say there are incredibly smart people out there that do this, but they skip the historical part, and they shipwreck. There's no way around it, unfortunately. And so I have come to these things more gradually and sort of compenetrated them in a more chemically effective way, we would point out. And not for like simply compensating the two things, but saying, okay, is this actually what happens? Is it a historically correct statement? That's what I pose myself as a question, because it's also really what I really... what it motivates me in this sense is that what I'm going to say out there is not, as I said before, nor as an entertainment form, nor as a moral shocker of any kind, even though it is at points, but especially it is correct. I'm coming here saying things. Sometimes I make mistakes myself. This is not to say that I'm infallible, but the type of stuff that I research and I put at your disposal is exactly what I want to say. Look, this is the actual point. So any other person who comes around and makes something that is sort of less than this is just wasting their time. All right? Because you must learn the fundamentals from this. And it is the hierarchical organism of my content that allows this to be an excellent starter pack for having not a basic history of the Middle Ages in a correct way, but actually a very advanced one. I mean, you can study and study and study my stuff if you have never heard of them without, say, buying books, which you should do, but also knowing in that sense how many things there are to know. And so actually that will make you buy books and appreciate also better what I'm saying, because definitely things I say are, say, outdated. One of the most conventional, that belongs to the past, but let's say there are people who are always, again, extremely suspicious about a person who has, for example, an independent idea as far as what this content is supposed to be about, and therefore they tend to stifle any attempt to say, okay, well, I think actually things were in this other way. Who said that? Well, as if history was just, I don't know, citing a scholar. If you don't have that, actually you can't have an opinion on your own. I actually I never had this actual issue at university, which is actually the place where at least you would expect this this kind of issues arise. They don't, right? These issues arise mostly on places like Reddit or any other, I don't know, sort of forum that seeks to... it didn't happen to me in a sort of general, say, substantial sense, but to demolish, to disintegrate the credibility of an author just because, he is like me, like an anonymous person who claims to be a PhD that is, talking freely without even, of course, citing anything, or at least, as you know, I work prepotently with sources when they're needed for an actual analysis. Like in yesterday's video about the Cardax, there are just 4 sources you can, to make a point, even browse them all. But let's say, if I'm talking the aforementioned topic of the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, and I know so much about that I do not need to cite anyone. Or if, like, it may happen, I do. I actually believe that I did also in my couple of videos, as a matter of fact, because I was in fact making a very powerful historiographical criticism towards scholars that basically forgot entirely about certain chunks of that topic, especially from a military point of view. And since I'm an insider, or maybe the person who was more aware of that than anyone else out there, like, pretty valuable to listen to. Just imagine you listening to me at that point and thinking, "Who the hell is this guy? I don't trust him. Who knows who it is?" And actually having the greatest expert in that specific field. Yes, I do specialize in the Holy Roman Empire, German, Italian warfare of the late 13th, first half of the 14th century. So I'm actually the only person doing it to the extent I do in the reconstruction of the art of war. And just imagine, someone, I don't want to read this because, I can read it somewhere else. Yes, from my work. I understand that. Yeah, you will read my work, but I'm the same person who's making the video that is actually doing it for free. Like, you don't have to attend a university, you don't have to come to listen to me during a conference. You can have me talk about this stuff every day, and you're not even suspecting that. So you know that it is in this kind of videos that I wave my own banner, let's say. I blow my own horn, so to say. But I don't go beyond this. Like, this is the sort of most aggressive, at least, because nobody really challenged me on anything, really. Like, there are insightful comments, there is criticism. I like the very well-informed one. Some of them are actually good, but they're also more like political chit-chat. Like, it's not much like a broader historical insight. So that I don't even, I don't have much time to respond. If anything, questions like this are the more useful ones, because they always come at a time in which, of course, I've been thinking about this from quite some time, and so I have somebody asking me the question and say, okay, well, I will make a video about it. That's how it works, right? So that's fundamentally it. Like, I don't believe it's such a difficult thing to do, to start from my content. For the rest, again, I told you, there is the Sorain playlist, which is pretty rich in this stuff. First of all, there is the question and answer series, in which I also answered this, like how to... Here I discuss things, even how to write a thesis, how to write a paper for a conference, this kind of things. Various historical viewpoints, right? You have my series about the doctorate I was talking about before. So everything is that clear, is that open, is that available. Know that I've made so much content. Like, you can't even be sure exactly about... Maybe you get my content right, but you can not be sure that I have, unless you have studied the whole content, that there is something that doesn't address and expand further on the same. So My issue here is really keeping this as relevant as possible for anyone who's interested in the objectivity, especially the military historical judgment, and some other aspects, like, I don't know, the veridicity of history of religions, what it was all about. As I said, I'm not an expert in all the topics I discuss. Nobody is. So there's not a person making content like that. They do not exist. Still, however, the fact that we've been in those places in our respective fields does allow us to criticize certain topics in ways that are unique and valuable. That's what our job also is. That's what we talk about. You should listen to, I don't know, have you ever heard a person during a conference debate having to cite a source to make their point? There is a certain courtesy and sort of obvious respect towards each other's intelligence to conduct a civilized discourse. I'm sorry to say that for myself, for anybody, but the internet is not exactly the place where you can find that. All right, so let's be serious about this. Oh, yes, I am the deal. All right, I'm that specific deal. If you don't like my content, if you think it's boring, it's fine. I understand you even. But let's be honest about what this is. Let's be honest about where I come from with this all, what I've been explaining about this all. And so let's not pretend that this is a channel like another, because you can't be farther from the truth. Right, and this is pretty much it. I think I'm going to make another video this evening because I have some extra time, which you may think it to be insane, but you know, it happens. I have a little reserve of videos that I can spend in this regard. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope, for this video, I should say, stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.